Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about a very controversial topic, I think even more. So, the ketogenic diet. Do you know what it is? Do you know what keto is? And do you know how to enjoy its benefits, if you know what they are, without cutting out carbohydrates? If you want to know, stay with me. I'm Julen Aldaya, a TSD dietitian, a member of the National Association of TSD Dietitians, and today we're going to talk about a very controversial and little-known topic. Why? Because it's polarized. Whenever something is polarized, people tend to have an almost voluntary ignorance. So, well, I think we'll please everyone, or to no one, it depends. What is the ketogenic diet? That diet in which ketone bodies are produced. Are we done? Are we going home? No, not in this case. The ketogenic diet is one in which ketone bodies are produced. Remember this definition. But to know that, we need to understand what ketone bodies are, how we can produce them, and what the benefits of ketone bodies are. And in this case, yes, the only way to get those benefits through ketone bodies is by cutting out an entire macronutrient. These are the problems with the ketogenic diet. Sometimes it's marketed in a way that it's not sold for something good, but because it's against something bad. Are carbohydrates the bad guys? No, it doesn't have to be. It's all about context, once again. In this case, when we stop eating, what happens? Very simple, we stop eating. Normally, in a Western diet where we consume more or less enough, I'm not even saying in excess, but we mainly take in carbohydrates as our energy source. We're using glucose in our meals. The liver gets loaded with glycogen, that glucose is turned into glycogen, and when we stop eating, it releases glucose into the blood, so we can use it to keep our levels simply stable. In this case, if we fast for X hours, or if we restrict carbohydrate intake, what happens when the liver glycogen runs out? Do we shut down like when your phone battery runs out? In this case, no, not at all, because the body has a backup molecule, let's call it that, a metabolic backup molecule, which are the ketone bodies, beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetone, and acetoacetic acid. In this case, beta-hydroxybutyrate, or BHB, would be the one we measure in the blood for ketosis and the most used, the most common, without going into details, of metabolism. This molecule at the brain level replaces glucose, and in a way, I would say quite intensely. Because there's a study from 1972 that couldn't be done today by George Kegel, who conducted quite a few studies on very long fasts, where they took subjects with obesity and had them fast for 2 months until they reached 8 millimoles of beta-hydroxybutyrate in their blood. And happened? Well, what did they do, to be more precise? They injected them with insulin, which would lower it, and in this case, it brought their sugar down to 9 milligrams per 100 ml. Sorry, we know that the standard fasting glucose levels are between 80. Someone with type 2 diabetes would have more than 100 when fasting, and should be a diabetic coma. In this case, there was an absolute resistance to the symptoms of hypoglycemia. They didn't notice anything. It went down from 8 millimoles to 6 and a bit of beta-hydroxybutyrate. They were simply another fuel for the brain, preferred by the brain, that replaced glucose, and in the absence of glucose, there was no problem. Another reason, or rather one of the reasons, why ketone bodies are vilified is because of their discovery. They were discovered in type 1 diabetics. I'm sure we've heard about ketoacidosis. Ketoacidosis has nothing to do with physiological ketosis. In ketoacidosis, levels hit 15 to 25 millimoles. Ketone bodies are vital for brain growth. A healthy person who fasts for 5 days will stay around 5. But if they had been discovered in another context, it's known that ketone bodies are essential for the formation of the central nervous system and brain development. In newborns, when we are just born, we are born in ketosis. And this would seem like an argument that for many would confirm that we have to live in ketosis our whole lives. Not all our contexts. And this is where it gets interesting. That backup molecule has many signaling functions beyond just being a mere fuel, at the muscular level. In fact, for those of us who know a lot about sports, it's not a good muscular fuel. When we fast for a few days, there's an adaptation in the muscle so that it uses less and less ketone bodies, allowing those ketone bodies to float in the blood for the brain to use. So let's take a little look at the effects of ketone bodies on the brain. Come on. We've already seen that beyond saving you from a diabetic coma in a lab context that couldn't be done today, the only person who was on the brink of something was the doctor who did it. These would be the words of Stephen Phinney because I understand the nervousness. Beyond that, it can be said that they have certain benefits. We know this at a therapeutic level, for example, in epilepsy, and now also in cases of brain injuries, TBI or traumatic brain injury. There's quite a bit of research being done on it. But in healthy individuals, if anything is noticeable, we could say there's an increase in cognitive performance. Studies have been done on athletes showing that they maintained their decision-making ability better after quite exhaustive exercise, which would normally leave them more fatigued. It was a memory test in this case, but that's one of the things that really stands out in the anecdotes. In ketosis, people mainly feel better. And on the other hand, One thing it does is eliminate appetite. That's where the key comes in, and that's where things get confusing. Do you lose weight with ketosis itself? Yes and no. Ketosis is a sign that we are beta-oxidizing fat. We're using a lot of fat, there's no carbohydrate. That beta-oxidation in the liver produces ketone bodies, and we're using them. That fat can be endogenous, meaning we've released it from our adipose tissue, from our love handles, or it can be exogenous. Sometimes you see people on the ketogenic diet limiting themselves to eating more and more fat, thinking that having higher levels of ketone bodies means they're losing more fat. No, it doesn't have to, not at all. But what's interesting is that it has an anorexigenic effect. They suppress our appetite. You have more mental energy, you have less appetite, and this often leads to an involuntary restriction of calories, which ends up being what makes you lose fat. That doesn't take away the validity of the diet for many people. If this in blocks socios is a way that turns out to be affordable and is done healthily to lose fat, to create an involuntary calorie deficit, then of course it can be used as a tool. If it's sold as the only way for humans to eat, something that's unsustainable, something that's a strategy, it can be used strategically. It may sound redundant, but I think it's quite coherent. In this case, yes, we get the benefits of ketone bodies, but how can we achieve those ketone bodies beyond just restricting carbohydrates? Let's look at different ways. Now, with the example, the explanation from the beginning, one of them is quite clear. Or better said, the different variants of fasting. The ketogenic diet is basically a kind of imitation of fasting, but while eating. When we fast, we force the body to rebalance the supply of substrates and the demand or production of energy, or rather, it's one of the ways to achieve metabolic flexibility. Adapting ATP generation to ATP demand, finding different sources. We stop eating and we have to rebalance, in this case by using our endogenous sources, reserves for daily expenditure. If we take the same eating pattern, let's imagine we have breakfast at 7 or 8 in the morning. We have dinner late in Spain, around 9 or 10, and on top of that, we have a pre-bedtime snack while watching Netflix, which usually isn't a problem for many people. So in this case, there are quite a few hours during which we're fed. If we take that eating window and reduce it to a typical standard, the most basic one, which many people don't even mention, the 14-10, we fast for 14 hours and eat within a 10-hour window, what we achieve is literally that. We're leaving more hours for the body to rely more on its reserves. Doesn't mean we're going to lose more at the end of the day. Why? Because in the end, the total matters. But in this case, the use of substrates is readapted. And here it's the same. Interesting. Anyone who fasts for about 12 hours starts to have some small levels of ketone bodies. Nutritional ketosis is considered when we reach 0.5 millimoles. It's like a cutoff point. Well, anyone who fasts for between 12 and 14 hours is already at 0.10. 2. And this will vary a lot depending on the type of diet and so on. These are just examples. These are examples, or let's say averages or trends. Caffeine increases a little. Also, that release or those levels double. In about 4 hours, the level of ketone bodies. What does that mean? In this case, with a fast of 12 to 14 hours just with a black coffee, we already have certain levels. We're already enjoying those levels of ketone bodies in small doses. What does happen is that people who follow a more or less chronic ketogenic diet for a number of days literally need days to reach levels of 2.5, 3, 4. Well, in intermittent fasting of more than 14 to 16 hours with some caffeine, we're already generating ketone bodies. We could enjoy a few hours of a small dose of that effect in the ketogenic diet, even if the diet is moderate in carbohydrates. Here's another interesting way to generate ketone bodies. Let's say with a little shortcut, using MCTs or medium-chain triglycerides. We've all heard some pretty exaggerated claims about coconut oil, like metabolic magic, it destroys fat everywhere. Not too much and not too little. That certain fatty acids in coconut oil are MCTs. It's pure truth, and we can buy them separately. In fact, they are fatty acids that, being shorter in structure, when we ingest them, go to the liver and undergo beta oxidation more quickly, without the need for carnitine, without oxidative stress, and the excess enters the bloodstream, in this case in the form of ketone bodies. It's a quick way to achieve certain levels of ketone bodies. A dose-dependent relationship. The higher the dose, the more ketone bodies. But yes, they often cause certain stomach issues. There are people who take a dose of, for example, caprylic acid C, starting from 7 to 8 grams. If taken loose with liquid, it can cause diarrhea. But in this case, it would be a way to have a certain level of ketone bodies even while consuming carbohydrates. For those who want to dig a little deeper, one of the best researchers in the world, at least among the first, was Dr. Mary Newport, and the story of her husband, Dr. Stephen Newport, is quite exciting. She was the one who started researching coconut ketones. You can see the before after of Dr. Stephen Newport's clock test, and it had quite an interesting acute effect. A meta-analysis came out this month or last month discussing the effect of MCTs on cognitive performance, both acutely and chronically, age-related cognitive degeneration. And it was clear that it mainly had an acute effect. It's very logical. We're putting in a fuel, so to speak. There are studies that have a rather suggestive name like premium-grade fuel for the mitochondria. We're adding an extra fuel in this case, which acutely makes the brain work better. It's interesting when talking about Alzheimer's or age-related cognitive degeneration, which is something chronic and degenerative. That's where we can't make very strong claims. Could it be a good way to prevent it? The rational, scientific, mechanistic basis suggests that yes, but we can't make strong claims. But that would be one way. With fasting variants for X hours, we have higher levels of ketone bodies. If we break that fast and use MCTs, we achieve those higher levels of ketone bodies. And ketosis is having ketone bodies in the blood. A ketogenic diet is one where we produce ketone bodies. Ketogenesis is the production of ketone bodies. Now we also have a new thing, exogenous ketosis. You can take exogenous ketones. This was developed for the Navy SEALs to avoid oxygen toxicity at the level of the central nervous system. Thanks to Dom D'Agostino, he was one of the first researchers in the world on this. Now, they have been, treated like any relatively serious scientific topic in the media regarding sports. In this case, latest big weapon of the Tour de France of professional cyclists. Is it doping? It's not doping or anything like that. It has a super effect, thing like that. Yes, it does improve certain markers of overtraining because it allows us to benefit from ketone bodies, which aren't particularly at the muscular level, without having to restrict carbohydrates. But yes, exogenous ketones are an option. We have two types, esters and salts. Salts are cheaper and you get much lower levels. Esters are more expensive, they taste terrible, I have to say, but you can achieve much higher levels and in an acute way. If we understand this general context, we'll realize that the ketogenic diet is something that achieves a metabolic state, and that metabolic state is due to a specific fuel. We can produce that fuel either by not eating carbohydrates, by not eating for a certain number of hours, by eating a certain type of fat, or by ingesting it directly as if it were a macronutrient. We could call it a fourth macronutrient. But this does make us think that there isn't a magic diet, a magic metabolic state, or that carbohydrates have been eliminated for life. Not at all. And it's not that ketosis makes you lose weight just because you're in ketosis or because there's no insulin or anything like that. No. This, which is sometimes done in very well-controlled studies, like those by Kevin Hall, for example, with measured calories, doesn't apply in this case, but that doesn't mean it can't be something useful for a person. It really satisfies them. If avoiding carbohydrates and increasing fat, fiber, and protein, along with ketone bodies, has improved your health, congratulations. Remember, you can have days with varying ketone levels without cutting out carbohydrates entirely. This mindset prevents thinking, if I try this, I've already gained weight, so what does it matter? If that's what has improved your health, congratulations. But if you stick with this complete picture, will you be able to enjoy within your week, and I mean within your week, days with higher or lower levels of toned bodies without vilifying or without removing a carbohydrate? An entire macronutrient like that carbohydrate, with all the foods that I encompass for life and create an effect, a possible disinhibitory effect, a mentality in which you think, my God, if I try this, I've already gained weight. Ergo, what does it matter? And having a disinhibition, I hope you all have learned a lot. If you want more videos like this, please, let us know in the comments, and we'll see you in the next ones.